Hi, ladies and gentlemen. Terry Martin with the Illinois Channel, and I'm joined by Jeff Berkowitz in Chicago with Public Affairs TV. And Jeff, we are going to be taking a look. You and I were talking last week that the primary issue facing Chicago is crime. As you said, crime, crime, crime. That's what focuses, and we spent the whole show on that. We're going to be doing that again because, Jeff, as you and I talked about, after we did that show, there was an explosion in Chicago of crime. Folks, if you didn't know, there was a riot by young people, some say teenagers, young adults, marauding across areas of Chicago, down in Loop, across from Millennium Park, along Michigan Avenue, destroying property, attacking cars, attacking drivers in cars. There was one individual punching a bus driver. Let's take a look before we get into our conversation so you can see what it was like. It's some cell phone video that was put together on the street, and then we'll talk about this. And Jeff, there you go. A lot of people were frightened. Some people were sent to the hospital. What is the latest that you can tell us, both about what happened and what reaction has there been of the citizens of Chicago to what we just saw?
Well, Mayor-elect Brandon Johnson said in his April 16th statement, day after the, you want to call it riots, insurrection, takeover of downtown, not by teens, as he has said, but by teens and adults. These are not, when you got 19, 20 years old, I don't know that those are teens, okay? So he said, in no way do I condone the destructive activity we saw in the Loop and Lakefront this weekend. That's Mayor-elect Brandon Johnson. It is unacceptable and has no place in our city. However, and there's always with this mayor-elect and however or a but, okay? However, it is not constructive to demonize youth, mind you, who have otherwise been starved of opportunities in their own neighborhoods, okay, on that Saturday night. Hundreds of teens and young adults near Millennium Park.
Major tourist attraction.
Now what we saw, Terry, that evening Saturday night were hundreds of teens and adults breaking car windows, stomping on bus routes, car routes, throwing rocks and bottles at police and other incidents that weekend. A predominantly black crowd surrounding who? A biracial couple, a white Ashley Knudsen from South Carolina, there with her boyfriend who happened to be black, looking for a place to dine, to shop around 6 or so in that evening. Plenty of light. In the 100 block of Wabash, which is downtown in the Loop, with the mob throwing her black boyfriend to the ground, kicking his head, pummeling his body and his face. Ashley said there were so many thugs around him. It's my word, not hers. She couldn't even see him. Who stepped in to save the day? The mayor-elect to exercise some leadership just happened to be there? The police? No. The person who saved the day, Terry, was Lenora Dennis, a black Good Samaritan from Chicago, who stepped in and helped the couple get into a Macy's nearby where employees locked the doors to protect them after the mob had taken their phones, their watches, their purse, their wallets, their money, and their shoes, Terry. These are kids who who the mayor-elect says was starved of opportunities in their neighborhoods.
Let me insert. I don't understand this, and I think a lot of people downstate don't understand this. Now, Lori Lightfoot is still the mayor. Where were the police? Now, I got to imagine if we had Mayor Daley, the first Mayor Daley, he would have had a wall of police coming down and putting this down, clamping down in short order. Where are the law enforcement troops? And what's happened to Lori Lightfoot? Is she just taking a vacation and coasting to the end? Is she telling the police not to do something?
She has not been present for 4 years.
Well, have the police shown up? In this episode, did the police come?
Well, that's interesting, Terry. Good that you raise it, because Lenora Dennis, when she saw what was happening here, her instincts were to look for police. She saw some driving right nearby, went and stood in front of the car, pointed toward this area. Because this was a mob. She probably wasn't sure she could do anything, good-hearted as she was. So she pointed there. What did the police do? They drove around her. They avoided the situation. They went on. Okay? But Terry, well, we'll come back to the police and that at another time, but as she stood in front of the police car asking for help, the police drove around her and took off. So eventually, Terry, she was able to take this really good person, Lenora Dennis. She was able to take these people to the police to file a report.
So she was just an average citizen, to make this clear. She's an average citizen. She went in and rescued this one couple. They weren't the only people being attacked, but in this one instance, it was an average citizen, a woman, a black woman rescuing this couple. And it also shows, in this couple, as you said, the man was black, the woman was white. This was just crime. This was not a racial. It wasn't blacks against whites. The blacks were attacking the black man who they were kicking and attacking. So this was just lawlessness. Before we get into more, the question is leadership. The question is what Lori Lightfoot's doing. What are the police doing? What's the mayor-elect doing? Now, the mayor-elect was in Springfield at the state capitol on April 19th. Afterwards, after meeting with lawmakers, he came out and talked, and he was asked about his reaction and what he thinks ought to be done. Let's listen to some of his comments.
That happened over the weekend, and the violence that happens too many weekends and too many days, of course we don't condone that behavior. That's the first thing that I said. Look, you've been a part of my conversations about raising a family in Austin. Who has more incentive for a safe Chicago than someone who is raising a family in a neighborhood where there are more homicides in my neighborhood over the last 4 years combined than many of the neighborhoods that have been discussed? So no, I got you. I got you, Craig. It's not a mixed message though. Slow down for a second, okay? It's not a mixed message. These false choices that people continue to try to make this body in the city of Chicago make, it ends under my administration. That's a false choice. You can make sure that we eradicate the root causes that lead to violence, and we also can make sure that there's support on the front line to make sure that we're preventing violence. It's a false choice.
So, Jeff, there you are. The mayor-elect says it's a false choice picking between punishing criminals and security. That's a false choice. He says we can have it both ways. Others say that he wants to coddle criminals. What do you say?
Well, Terry, you have to be precise in your language. We need a mayor-elect who can distinguish between the short run and the long run. Very simple concepts. Short run, long run. What's the short run? Short run's today, next week, the week after. You don't want this to happen this weekend, next weekend. What do? You can't start saying stuff like, oh, it's a false choice. We can get at the roots of crime. We can do that. We can protect people. You're not protecting people. You and your fellow mayor, you're the mayor-elect. She's the current mayor. Where's your police chief? Who is your police? You don't have a police chief. You have a deputy chief, an interim police. Where's he? Where are the other people? Nobody knows. Nobody's in charge. This is not how grown-ups act. This is a city without leadership because
I would say it's a city
because
without leadership, has been for a number of years. Let me ask you, though, something I don't know if I heard. What reaction has there been within the city of Chicago? That's something I can't judge. You can tell me. You hear the people talking. Is there absolute disgust? Is there fear? Are they asking the same questions that I'm asking? Where are the police? Where's law and order? Where's the city government? What's the reaction?
it's a buzz. The couple I was telling you about, the boyfriend who was thrown down, there was a lot of attention paid to that, to the Good Samaritan who saved things, to the lack of police action. Oh no, this has been a constant buzz in talk radio, okay, and on TV and on the Fox News channel who picked this up. I think in what was it in Brett Baer's nightly show. This was not a scandal type thing. This is what is happening in Chicago for
It's a
all the
national
country in the
story.
world to
Yeah.
see. It's a national story, okay, and they're talking about it. And what's Brandon Johnson doing? He's down in Springfield. He's down in Springfield, sort of taking a victory lap, telling people the laws of supply and demand have been repealed, folks. Because guess what? He says his message to Springfield, there's plenty to go around. You can have things, I can have things, Chicago can have things, downstate. That's his
Well,
message.
he did say, relatives that you're bringing up taxation and all. He was asked at one point, what about property taxes? He says he's not going to increase property taxes, but he's going to go after taxing corporations. Now, Jeff, as you and I have mentioned, Citadel and Ken Griffin, the wealthiest individual who used to live in Illinois, is now in Florida, and so is his company, Citadel. The idea that corporations can't leave Chicago as if they would want to stay in this kind of an environment. And now they're going to pay higher taxes for it. We'll see how that goes over. But you got Boeing is gone, Citadel is gone. I don't know how many others, as we speak, as well as individuals, are packing up and saying adios. But as I said last week, how many families, how many more conventions are going to want to come to Chicago when this is what they see on the national news, beating up people, destroying the property, and we get a reaction from City Hall of shrugging their shoulders.
Well, he was asked in the piece you showed, I think, in that cut. I think he was asked because we heard him saying, "You want to make a false choice. We don't have to make choices. We can deal with the roots of crime. We can stop this." But he didn't say, this little thing was not a little thing. And he didn't say 9 adults and 6 juveniles were arrested. Because he talked about demonizing youth. The adults, are they youth? And they were arrested, I believe, mostly for reckless or disorderly conduct, reckless behavior. There may be a weapons charge or two there. Most likely the charges will be dropped. He didn't talk about that. He didn't talk about State's Attorney Kim Foxx, who doesn't really want to prosecute or even acknowledge the violent crime under her watch that's grown. No, he didn't talk about that at all. He didn't talk about the violent assaults. He didn't talk about setting cars on fire. He didn't talk about pulling a guy while his wife watched in horror out of the car and start pummeling him. No, he didn't talk about any about that. It was a la-di-da moment in Springfield. And the press, they didn't follow up because they never do. Because if they want to be invited to do one of those, la-di-da interviews, well, they can't ask them tough questions, Terry. So he waltzed into Springfield. He waltzed out.
I don't have a problem with him going to Springfield for a variety of reasons. I'm not going to get into it. I don't have a problem with going to Springfield. I do have a problem when people don't address the issue and say, we are going to bring law and order to the streets of Chicago one way or another. And my advice, he should have said to to the young people and anyone else that thinks they can engage in mayhem is it's not going to happen in Chicago under my watch. That's the kind of message that should have been sent. Not, well, you know, these poor unfortunate souls, they just haven't had the opportunities. You don't excuse violence on the streets, violence against people, violence of setting up and destroying people's property. That can't be. If you want to be a leader, that's intolerable. Now, why don't we, we're about halfway through the show, so why don't we talk about maybe some of the policies that need to be addressed?
Before we go there, let me address one thing, because he did say something, Terry, and we didn't get to the full statement. He did say, according to the Tribune's report, no criticizing the kids, the mayor-elect said, the Tribune reported. Even if you ran hard and fast at the sound of gunshots, or decided to check out of your Loop Hotel early, eat the bill, and take your next spring break in a city other than Chicago. Tourism be damned, really. It's amazing that he would make that statement. I threw in the last bit about tourism be damned, but that's his attitude. That's reported in the Chicago Tribune. Check it out, April 17. 28 days before being sworn in.
Aside from these people being kicked and punched, were there killings? Did people die during this?
I don't think they died. There were shootings, and some were wounded and taken to the hospital. I don't think anybody died, because as Paul Vallis said, look, they're not going to arrest you. You don't have to worry about that unless you kill somebody. So if you want to have somebody arrested who did harm to you and you're the victim, make sure you're dead, because then they got some arrest rate, right? 32% or so if you're murdered. It's about 5% if you're assaulted but not murdered.
And the point is that people were shot. This wasn't just kids being kids and kids being, wilding. And by the way, on social media, they've been calling for coming out again
this weekend.
Yeah.
Of course, Terry, because here's this
are
one
the
thing.
police ready? Are they talking about it? Is there a message being sent to that?
You asked sort of implicitly about the media. This is from WGN, as they say, Chicago's own. April 18th, a few days after, to reflect on this, what happened on the weekend. This is TV news report by anchors Ray Cortopassi and Dina Bair. Dina Bair says the traumatized couple, I'm putting that, but she says they, and they meaning the traumatized couple, I guess, who they were discussing, have hope for the world after that Good Samaritan who they discussed, Lenora Dennis, who we discussed, after she came forward. But there was no interview with Brandon Johnson. There was no questioning of Brandon Johnson. There was no discussion of the police chief, currently the interim, Eric Carter. No, there was no talking about what's Eric Carter doing, recommending that in the Adam Toledo shooting. We won't go into all those details. We told our viewers about it. We'll come to that.
They're corporate media, and they can't say what we can say.
Well, they editorialize when they like. There's nothing about the mayor. They don't give you the data, which we'll do now. And they don't quote from Senator Robert.
We have 10 minutes left in the show.
But just the one quote from State Senator Robert Peters, who is chair in the Illinois legislature of the Black Caucus, okay, the Democrat Black Caucus. And here's what he says. Senator Peters, I would look at the behavior of young people in this incident as a political act and statement. It's a mass protest against what, Terry? Poverty and segregation. This is from the chair of the Black Senate Caucus in Springfield. This is the best they can come up with.
I might want to ask Senator Peters, what about 20 and 30 and 40 and 50-year-olds who are struggling financially? Do we get to go out and beat people up on the streets? Do we get to go out and shoot at people? Do we get to go out and set other people's cars on fire?
We love to interview Senator Robert Peters.
They're not going to. They're never going to. This is ridiculous. It's just ridiculous.
Well, let's give people some idea of why this is happening and why it's likely to continue to happen. Let's look at some data from WirePoints. Let's put this in the context of the broad historical context. Let's put this in the context what happened in 1970s, 80s, 90s, and then so forth. And what happened in New York when they were Mayor Rudy Giuliani back in the day when he was America's mayor. He oversaw a collapse in New York City homicides during his tenure. So look at those numbers in the 80s and 90s. In that tenure, homicides come way down in New York, right? And and what happens? They stay down. Look at that drop from 2,000 homicides, now a population of 8 million, pretty high even then, over 2,000
Well, in the
homicides in
90s, I mean, it
1991.
was very high in the 90s, over
And
2,000.
then what happens under Giuliani's tenure?
Yep.
1997, he's down to 600, less than we have now in Chicago, a city of 1/3 of the population in New York. And then it stays there, Terry. It stays there in 2000, 500 or so, 2006, stays there, going up recently. And let's take you to D.A. Bragg. We've all heard about D.A. Bragg in New York, the district attorney, and now he's touting the low homicide rate of New York City last year. He doesn't give you the context that was brought about by Rudy Giuliani, right? I mean, let's go to the next slide. Let's go to the next slide on 30 years after the New York City reforms, Chicago's homicide rate remains 5 times higher than New York City's. Is Mayor-elect Brandon Johnson talking about that? Is our current mayor for the last 4 years talking about it? I don't hear it, Terry. Are the media talking about that? Look, those wavy charts may be a lot to digest in a few seconds, but notice the New York homicide rate per 100,000 residents starts pretty high, like about 30 per 100,000 back in 1988. And notice that black line comes down quickly. By 97, by 2000, it's down to 5, and it stays down there. Los Angeles, high. It drops quickly, and it stays down there. That's the green line.
And again,
Higher than
these
New
are
York,
these are
much higher than
homicides per
Chicago.
100,000 people, we want to point out.
Right, so it's adjusted for population. But look at Chicago. Chicago's the outlier. It's high with the other two cities in 1993 and 94. Comes down somewhat, but not as much as them. And then it's going up and down. And now it's 5 times higher than New York. Why would that be, Terry? Is it just that Chicago is a high homicidal city? Is that why, Terry? Or could it be New York had the broken glass theory, which their superintendents followed? They said, when there's some broken glass, we're not going to let it just sit there. We're going to find out who did it. We're going to get it cleaned up. And we're going to do the same with all crime, especially murders, but not only murders. This broken glass theory seemed to work. District Attorney Bragg didn't seem to notice that. He just went to this high homicide rate because District Attorney Bragg doesn't believe in the broken glass theory. State's Attorney Kim Foxx doesn't believe in the broken glass theory. Mayor Lightfoot doesn't believe in that. Mayor-elect Brandon Johnson doesn't believe in that. So we're going to continue to have 5 times the homicide rate of New York until we change what we do, what our superintendent of police does, our police chief. We're just not going to get any better. We're going to be, on the next slide shows, Chicago had the nation's second highest. You see, Chicago's the outlier. I didn't hear anybody asking Brandon Johnson about that. I didn't hear WGN talking about that. They're talking about these data on CNN, but not here in Chicago. We have parochial interests. WirePoint is talking about it because they come from Chicago. But now they're a national figure. But what does WGN say? Nothing. Zero. This discussion is not being had in our local stations, occasionally by local Fox, occasionally by Mike Flannery, who deserves some credit for noticing what WirePoints is doing and making them a part of his discussion. But Terry, it's not going to get better in Chicago until the philosophy of the mayor.
I mean, frankly, I don't care what the news media says as much as I care about what the mayor says. What I care about what the police and the city aldermen. What are the city aldermen doing about this? Are they reacting to the comments of Mayor-elect Johnson? Are they coming out and saying he's wrong? Are they saying what we're saying, or what's going on?
This is interesting. Brian Hopkins, who's a city councilman, an alderman, he's now talking about this. He's now saying what's going on. Why isn't more being done? Why isn't the city being protected? Why aren't the restaurants
We got
being
about 2
protected?
minutes left here, so just as a...
Well, so one last slide really quick. Look at the broad sweep from the 1960s. Peak murders from 64 to 2000. Look at the murder downturn that happened 2004 to 2016. In comes Fox. In comes Lightfoot. We're regressing. This is the broad sweep. Do people want more of this? They've elected this guy. Chicago citizens, 51% to 49%, elected Mayor-elect Brandon Johnson. Can they cause him to change? Can they cause State's Attorney Kim Foxx to change? Can they get a replacement from her in 2 years? Can they do something about this? Will there be a shadow mayor, and will Brandon Johnson be pressured to start changing the ways and fixing crime?
Look, I would say to the city alderman, we just, the Illinois Channel just reported on Monday, there was a hearing in New York about Bragg, about crime, and there was a Democratic alderman, and he was talking, against what was going on with crime, against what Bragg was doing. That's leadership. He wasn't just being quiet because it's a Democratic district attorney and he's a Democrat. I would encourage the business community to speak out, the aldermen to speak out. As I say, if the media wants to say something, that's up to them. But folks, if you want to save Chicago, what we just saw happen, what Jeff and I have been talking about, that can't last. Jeff, you got about 20 seconds. Take us out.
Well, just say, folks, if you're watching this on, youtube.com/IllinoisChannelTV or youtube.com/PublicAffairsTV, you just go and comment. We will respond. Folks, Democrat, Republican, Independent, doesn't matter. Chicago needs coalitions of people who think about the things we're talking about.
All right, leave us your comments.
Doesn't matter
and
your
thanks for
party.
joining us. Thanks so much.